everyone, I hope you're doing well. Today we have a new gouache painting tutorial of this summery lighthouse scenery. This is a pretty easy and quick painting that you can achieve in an hour or so it's perfect for practicing or for getting back to painting after a break. I posted a tutorial of this summer field painting last month, so I'll link that video down below, but now let's get started with this painting. I'm using a cold-pressed watercolor sketchbook, and we'll start by drawing a quick sketch of this landscape with a pencil. So I usually start from the horizon line, and in this painting it's quite high up. And then we'll loosely sketch some of the main elements of this picture. So this would be the clouds in the sky, then these land areas towards the sides and the lower part of the painting. I think it makes it easier to visualize these land areas as these three-dimensional blocks where the top is for the grass and the side part is for the rocky cliffs. And then we'll of course draw the lighthouse and the small building next to it, which will help a lot in the painting phase. With gouache paints, you are able to paint over the previous layers, so if you feel confident, you don't need to sketch, but personally, I think it helps to have a guide for where to roughly place the different color blocks in the beginning. But now that the pencil sketch is out of the way, we can jump to the painting part. We're going to start from the sky as usual, and I'll use these two different blue tones mixed with a lot of white to create a very bright turquoise sky. I wanted the colors in this painting to be very saturated and bright to add to this summery feel, and then we'll just start to sweep this color all over the upper part of the sky. I'm using a flat brush for the whole beginning part of this painting because I like how quick it is to add color to large areas with it, and it's also very versatile. So as you can see, once the sky is done, I mixed a little bit of green and more white to this same color, and we'll use this for the water part. At this point, we are just roughly going around the land shapes. Nothing needs to be super precise at this point. And I'm also going to take a lighter blue and go around some of the water area with this one. The white areas will help to give the appearance of waves or this, white foam when the water reaches any kind of surface. After this, we can start to add the similar background layers to the crown part, and for this step I'm gonna add two new colors to my palette. So yellow ochre and permanent yellow deep. We'll mix a very yellow green tone as our first crown color, and I'm pretty much adding the lightest ground shade here first, and then we'll little by little mix more of the green to get this color slightly darker when we move towards the lower areas. Again, nothing needs to be precise at this point. I'm also using pretty thick paint here because we don't really need to worry about blending, and the thick paint helps to cover the sketchbook paper nicely. After that, I'm gonna add my last two colors here, which are magenta and ivory black. And we're gonna use these mixed with the darker blue shade to create this very dark, pretty much black color for the rocky cliff parts. I know painting rocks and cliffs like this might be a little bit intimidating, but I would advise you to not overthink this step. If you use sharp angular strokes and add some very general lights and shadows, which we're gonna do in a little bit, it will already pretty much look like some kind of rocky surface. So here I mixed a little bit of this lighter brownish gray shade that we get by mixing some of the yellow ochre and magenta with a little bit of blue and white. If you want any of your colors to be more gray, you can always add a little bit more black and white to the mixture to desaturate the color a little bit. We're gonna work on the ground and these rocks more in a little bit, but while this dark paint was still drying, I decided that we could first jump back to the sky and add some very light color to these clouds. So as you can see, I'm barely adding any color here, just this very, very light misty blue color to add the slightest shadow to create a little bit of shape to the clouds. And after that, I just went ahead and started to paint the lighthouse and the small building next to it. Again, I didn't want to spend too much time on this step, so we're gonna keep this pretty simple. I'm just using some gray, black, and brown colors here, and we're also switching to a much smaller brush that will allow us to paint these smaller details for the windows and for the rail here at the top of the lighthouse. Some of my lines here are definitely not straight, and I tried to fix it as best as I could, but at the same time, it's not the end of the world. But after this whole step, we can jump back to the ground. So I'm gonna add some of the same grass colors and kind of fill some of these white gaps between the ground and the rock parts. And then we can also start to add some highlights and shadows to these cliffs. I think it worked pretty well to add a little bit of lighter colors towards the upper parts of the rocks, but still leave room for a dark shadow line right at the top edge. So this will kind of be the shadow created from the grass on top. And again, I'm not trying to do anything crazy here, so my shapes are very rough, but I think it's enough for a quick practice like this, and it just goes to show how little you actually have to paint any small shapes for everything to pretty much look like natural things in the nature. Then if you feel like your crown part is floating above the water, it's probably because we haven't added any shadow from the rocks to the water. So I feel like adding these slight reflections creates a much more realistic look here. And we are also adding some of these slightly darker blue lines and shadows to the water. So this will just create some appearance of waves. And honestly, I think I could have added even more lights and shadows to the water part, especially in the horizon, but I feel like I was already getting a little bit too detailed with some of this water part, so I wanted to keep it as simple as possible. Then lastly, I think it's always a good idea to add some white dots here and there, so maybe there are some waves crashing against the cliffs or some foamy water highlights around the rocks. But after that, let's jump back to the ground and grass part, and first we'll just add a little bit more texture here and there. This will also help to blend any harsh lines you might have between the different colors. And at this step, you might notice that I'm using a little bit more water in the paint, which will give you this little bit lighter, less opaque paint look that I think is good for adding texture for already colored areas. Then I thought we could add some flowers and grass strokes, especially here at the front part. For these flowers, contrast to what I just said before, we are using very thick paint, so only a tiny bit of water to make the paint easier to work with. And you could go with pretty much any color flowers here, but I chose to go with some yellow, white, and lilac flowers because those were the colors I had on my palette. You can get very far with just these random tapping motions, and then the last thing I did here on the crown was to add some small white highlights to some of these rocks just to experiment with how it would look, and I think it worked pretty well, but definitely not necessary. And then the last thing I decided to do here was to add a little bit of fluffiness to the clouds, because I feel like they were looking too structured compared to the texture and looseness of the other parts of this painting. But after that, that's finally it for this summery lighthouse scenery. I really hope you enjoyed watching and will give this a go. If you do, please let me know how it went for you in the comments. And if this was your first time around here and you'd like to stay tuned for more art and journaling stuff, definitely consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a lovely day or night wherever you are, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye bye!